So many things have ruined my childhood, so I go online to bitch and cry. It feels like all of Hollywood is up against me. They even made Optimus fly. New versions of what I grew up with are being remade, rebooted and retried. My adolescence is under attack now. I think that a part of me has died. Aliens, Predators, Marvel, DC, maybe it doesn't all quite stick.
Okay, well, except maybe for that Jar Jar Binks.
Could it be I've misunderstood? This podcast ruined my childhood.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to This Podcast Ruined My Childhood. I'm Phil Durasmo, and with me is Eric Walensky.
Hey, Phil. Are we starting the podcast right now?
Yes, we are.
Oh, well, I'll be right back.
Hello?
Hello?
Yes?
Who is this?
Who are you trying to reach?
What number is this?
What number are you trying to reach?
I don't know.
Well, I think you have the wrong number.
Do I?
It happens. Take it easy. Hello?
Why don't you want to talk to me?
Who is this?
You tell me your name, I'll tell you mine.
I don't think so.
What's that noise?
Popcorn.
You making popcorn?
Uh-huh.
I only eat popcorn at the movies.
Well, I'm getting ready to watch a video.
Really? What?
Oh, just some scary movie.
You like scary movies?
Uh-huh.
What's your favorite scary movie?
I don't know.
You have to have a favorite. What comes to mind?
Halloween. You know, the one with the guy in the white mask who walks around and stalks babysitters?
That's right, everybody. This week, we're talking about the Scream Quadrology. We're getting right into spooky season at the beginning of October, and we're going to be bringing you a few horror movies for all of our spooky friends out there that love horror just like I do. And we're going to touch on the quadrology that brought horror movies back to the forefront of modern cinema. We had a great run in the 70s of 80s of horror, that these movies that became larger than life with characters and villains that were larger than life. They all kind of went away in the mid to late 80s with bad sequels and bad remakes. And one movie came and brought a reinvigoration to the horror franchise, and that was Scream. So, Eric, what are your memories of seeing Scream for the first time?
Scream was actually, the first Scream was a video rental or a DVD rental. I don't remember. For me, I did not see it in its original theatrical release. I'm not much of a horror buff, really. You mentioned the iconic characters of the 70s and 80s. I've seen like the first Friday the 13th. I saw the first Nightmare on Elm Street, but yeah, I'll be honest, Freddy Krueger freaks me out. So I watched like parts of Nightmare on Elm Street 2, like with my hand in front of my face with the the scissor eyes, where I could just close the blinds real quick, and I watched parts of 3 that way. Yeah, I just as a child, scary movies, just my imagination was so overactive that I couldn't watch a horror film and not have that sit with me for forever. But Scream, of course, being a different sort of film, not with a monster, ghost face, of course, but with no real like supernatural kind of creepy creature like that, and being almost not even being almost being a fresh take, on the horror genre, even going into meta territory and calling it all out. Mm-hmm. I really enjoyed Scream. Didn't really get me inspired to watch any more horror, really, but I do like the kind of campy fun of the Scream quadrology.
Yeah, I love it. It's the same for me. It was a rental. I was 14 when this came out, so I was just getting into horror movies. So this was like a fresh new horror movie that I had seen because, I had seen other horror movies as rentals on the small screen at friends' houses, because I wasn't necessarily allowed to watch them, but at friends' sleepovers, as I always say, I catch I would catch these movies. And Friday the 13th was one of the first that I'd ever seen. The original Halloween, I think, was the first horror movie I ever saw. And Friday the 13th, and I just fell in love with those characters and those villains. And yeah, they were unsettling to me, but something about watching a horror movie made me like that feeling of being unsettled. And so when a new, fresh take for an audience around my age came out, I I couldn't get enough of it, and I was so happy. So I said I was 14. I was actually 15. So this came out in '96. I was 15 when it came out. I truly don't think I saw it in the theater, because I do think that I was maybe still just a little too young, but I know I saw it on video, and I know that I saw Scream 2 in the theater for sure. Um, and my love of this franchise was born with this film, and lived on into Scream 2. And a couple years later, I kind of took a dip with Scream 3, which we'll talk about in a bit, but then was reinvigorated with the reboot meta style of Scream 4. So, yeah, it was just, I loved that they took the horror genre, the villain, the evil creature kind of aspect of it, and turned it on its head, and really made what happened in this film as if it were happening in real life. Where a lot of those other movies, are tongue in cheek, and they're made to just be scary. This one took that and took the tongue in cheek to another level by being meta, and it was very exciting and very refreshing. And like I said, it reinvigorated the horror franchise. And after Scream, we saw tons of both copycat and original horror movies start being made. One of the most well-known right after Scream was I Know What You Did Last Summer, which is another great, in my opinion, great horror film of the mid-90s.
Oh, I saw that one too. I did see that one. See, I'm okay with more of a suspenseful horror film and not just a Freddy Krueger monster type. Though
Got it.
that just gets me. But yeah, I saw I Know What You Did Last Summer, and I really enjoyed that one.
Mm-hmm. So this movie, and all of the movies in the series, are directed by one of the masters of horror, which is Wes Craven. And I can't say enough about what Wes Craven has done for horror movies in general. He brought us Nightmare on Elm Street. He brought us The Last House on the Left, which is one of the original horror movies in the early 70s. And he also brought us the remake of Last House on the Left, which is so interesting that he not only wrote and directed the original, but he wrote and directed the remake, which is cool. Which makes him kind of the perfect person to do a meta version of horror movies, because he is so ingrained in horror that he can look at it from the lens outside of what he does. And I just think it's so cool that he was able to bring this to all of us before he died. He created this wonderful series and gave it to the world, all 4 of the Scream movies, before he passed away in 2015. Eric, what are your memories of the rest of the series?
Like I said, I watched the first one. I really enjoyed it. It was fun. I liked the take on the horror film. Scream 2, I did see that one in the theaters, and that one I thought was fun, and I liked then that they were doing the rules now for the second film. Well, the kill's got to be bigger. This has to happen. That has to happen. And then, of course, leading into Scream 3. Scream 3 and Scream 4, I actually did not see until a couple weeks ago when we talked about doing this podcast. And see, I thought I had seen 3. And after I watched 3 again, I realized I had only seen parts of it, and I knew roughly the end of it, but I never really watched all of the beginning. I didn't even realize that Liv Schreiber was in the beginning of 3. I'd never seen that part. So what I ended up doing, actually, because I've seen Scream 1 and Scream 2 a bunch of times, I started with Scream 4 thinking that was the only one I needed to see. And then I went back and I was like, oh, I'll probably just be able to skim Scream 3. And I'm like, no, I guess I never watched this. And then I was kind of like excited, and I'm like, okay, well, I'll watch Scream 2. And then I was like, well, what the heck? So I actually watched all 4 of these films reverse order a couple weeks ago.
Mhm.
and it's kind of neat to watch Nev Campbell get younger. It's funny to watch her and Courtney Cox's bangs go
Yeah,
up
oh
and
god.
down their forehead.
Ugh, the bangs.
The haircuts are terrible.
So
And then
bad.
especially for 3 and 4, I'm like, this is modern. What
Right.
happened?
It's like they leaned into the joke, everything being meta. In Scream 2, her hair was so bad, they just kept leaning into it.
Yes, yeah. So I don't really have memories per se of this. I mean, unless you count just a couple weeks ago.
Mhm.
But no, one is hilarious and a really neat, well written film. Um, Scream 2, it lost a little because you're so meta. The meta just stacks up the further you get into this, and like I noticed in 3, I found myself thinking like, wait a minute, who's going to show up and do the rules? We don't have Randy.
Mhm.
And then the sister shows up with the videotape of Randy saying, "Hey guys, if you're watching this, it means I died, and it means there's another killer."
Yep.
And then he gives us the trilogy rules, which I like that all
Yeah,
bets are off. Anybody, but of course, as I'm watching in reverse order, I already know who doesn't make it. But
that's true.
and of course, I know there's a 5 coming. So that's what's kind of funny about watching horror films either in reverse order or years and years after they happen, and another one's coming, because now, while typically the heroine, tracks through each film, um, you don't necessarily know about sub characters, but it's like, oh yeah, I know they're all coming back, and the
Yeah.
tension's kind of off. Like, I'm not really worried that Dewey's going to die because I know he pops back up in 4. I just watched
Yep.
it. So anyway,
Yeah, no, that's a good point, and that's funny that you watched it all in reverse. That's pretty good. I didn't watch Scream 1 to get ready for this. I watched 2, 3, 4 in that order. It's just to get a refresh because I've seen Scream so many times. It is one of my favorite horror movies of all time, and just to refresh 2, 3, 4. It's funny you bring up the bangs because Courtney Cox's hair is just out of control in 2 with the weird red streaks in it with those awful bangs. I mean, it's the worst it's ever been. I guess that's Gail Weathers' defining trait, is that she just has bad choice in a hairstylist. I don't know. It's funny that you say the tension's off because you know who's going to make it and who doesn't. But for me, watching the film, I still get those little jumps when things happen to our lead characters, like when in 2 when Dewey gets sliced up in the sound room, and you think this is it for Dewey when you were watching the movie in the theater. It's and you just have this feeling of dread that this character that you know survived 1, now it's the second one, he's probably gone. But then he's okay at the end. And now 3, he's probably gone in 3, but it's I still feel that tension when I rewatch them, even though I know they're going to make it. And that's what I love about what not just all horror movies, but this franchise in particular does well, which is make you care about the characters.
yes,
A lot of horror movies, the characters are just teenagers that, tick them off as they go out, especially Friday the 13th movies. Like,
right,
here's a bunch of camp counselors. Let's just tick off this one's going to die first, this one's going to die next. But these characters in the Scream franchise, I truly don't want any of them to die.
right.
And that's what is so good about what Wes Craven does in this film, is he makes you care. And that's what I love about each of these.
Even in the first one, which is
Mm-hmm.
probably obviously the closest to a traditional horror movie with a whole cast of teenagers, which ones are going to get it, I still found myself caring about them, even though I
Yep.
barely knew them at that point. But as the franchise went on, yes, you're caring now. You're like, oh, everybody
Mhm.
except those 2 are back, and oh, oh no, like when Randy died.
Yep. Randy, oh
Oh
man.
man, that was. But when you talk about jumps, that really got me in the theater. That
Mm-hmm.
really, when he yanked him into the van, I was like, "Oh no!" And then the guys with the boom boxes come by, and
Yep.
oh, they
Yep.
can't hear the struggle or the shrieking, and I
Mm-hmm.
was like, "Oh man!" And Randy dying was probably the definitive moment for me in the whole of all these movies, because it's like, no, he was the guru. He knew what was going on, and
Yep.
he's gone. oh
Yeah.
no, who's gonna guide us? And that's why even in 3, I'm realizing, I'm like, there's no Randy. Who's gonna guide us? And I was like,
Mhm.
oh, that was beautiful the way they did that.
Yeah, and it's funny they had him dressed like he was in 2
Yes,
because he filmed it while that was happening. You
yes.
know, it's just so it was so smart. But you're right, Randy going. It's the worst thing that happened in any of the films because not just that he was the guru, but he was the character that a lot of people like myself identified with. You know, he was the film nerd. He was the he was the dork that wanted the girl. You know, he was the one that we could identify with in this world. For those of us that were big film buffs, big horror buffs, and kind of the geek that always wanted the girl out of their league. You know, that was me in high school. So seeing Randy die in 2, like, oh man, it was heartbreaking. Absolutely heartbreaking.
So speaking of Jamie Kennedy, briefly, Jamie Kennedy actually was sort of floundering around Hollywood, wasn't getting anything, and he started working somewhere in sales. Realized he was a great salesperson, and then came up with the idea to be his own agent. And he started
Hmm.
calling other agents in Hollywood, talking up his client, Jamie Kennedy, which
Huh.
ultimately led to him getting an audition for Scream, and he got the role.
Wow. Look
That's
at him.
that's Jamie Kennedy basically invented himself. And then from there he kind of got into the stand up, and he obviously made the sequel Scream 2, and then Jamie Kennedy Experiment and everything else. So,
Hmm.
but I think that's really interesting, like when you wonder, like, how did an actor become an actor? Like, did they just sit through endless cattle calls? Did they get like so close on this and so close on that? And just what was their journey? Anyway, that's a little background on Jamie Kennedy.
How interesting. How interesting. Jumping into Scream 2 where he gets it, I think it's so great. The whole scene is tense. Dewey and Gail are looking around for somebody on the phone, and he is walking around the quad. He should have just stayed where he was. I don't know why he was walking around, but he goes to the van, and the last thing he says is comparing this killer to Billy Loomis. And it's great how we find out at the end that Billy Loomis's mother is the one that got so angry with what he was saying. She was going to kill him anyway, but that is just an extra, stab to the chest that
Mm-hmm.
he was talking about Billy, and then she's the one that pulled him in the van and just went to town on him.
Yeah.
What a good surprise that was too, that that woman was Billy Loomis's mom. Like the killer has to have a motivation, right? In some horror movies, it's just a killer for killer's sake, but in this movie, they make a motivation. Billy, Sydney's mom is the reason that his parents split up. So his motivation is because Sydney and her family broke his home. And Stu is just the lackey that comes along because of peer pressure. And Stu, Matthew Lillard's character, great, great lines. My mom and dad are going to be so mad at me. It's so good. But in Scream 2, we get the same kind of thing where the mom is Billy Loomis's mom is the villain who has the motivation. And then there's Mickey, who is just the film student, and he is going to blame it all on the movies. And so he has a motivation, but same as Stu, it's just not as fleshed out. And at the end of the movie, we're told by Billy's mom when she tries to kill him, that's stupid. There's no reason for that should be a motivation.
Well,
Um,
so here we go, Phil. You broke the ice on
mhm,
these movies making sense and having motivation and not just killing for killing's sake.
mhm,
Because having like watched all of these and maybe even reverse order gave me another little insight into them. Perhaps, I don't know. But for the most part, there is no reason for the mass murdering. As you pointed out, Scream 1, Billy's mad because Sydney's mom had an affair with his dad, which made his mom leave. So he wants to kill random people, including the high school principal, because of it.
mhm,
It leaves a little lack of motivation, and they even talk about motivation at the very end of Scream. Him and Matthew Lillard and Nev Campbell are like, well, how about because your mom had an affair with my dad, which made my mom leave? How's that for motivation? And I'm like, well, that's motivation for killing Sydney, but it's not really motivation for having killed Matthew Lillard's girlfriend and the high school principal
Hmm.
and Drew Barrymore and her boyfriend. So it's like these guys were just serial killers waiting to pop. I
Yeah.
mean,
Well, they were, and that's kind of what they explain, right? And they are going to pin it all on Sydney's dad, who they're going to say just goes crazy and starts killing just for killing's sake. So that's kind of why they killed so many people, to just make it look like her dad has just gone crazy.
sure. And then skipping over 2, though, to get to 3, we find out that, as Jamie Kennedy pointed out, there's a backstory. Everything
Right.
goes back to the first one, a backstory you didn't know was there. And actually, that line kept me engaged in the movie because to that point in Scream 3, I was like, what are we doing here? What's
Hmm.
the point? And then when he said that, I'm like, okay, because Jamie Kennedy told me the rules, I will now allow the rest of this movie to entertain me because to this point, I'm just like, I don't get it. Why are we
Yeah.
trying to draw out Sydney? What's the deal here? So then you find out that the killer in the third one, who actually turns out to be Sydney's half brother from another tryst that her mom had,
Hmm.
went to the town to say, "Hi, mom, I found you." She rejects him, so then he's like, "Well, you know what I'm going to do? I'm not going to kill you, but I'm going to get these other guys to kill you because it's a good thing you're having affairs with everybody in town, and then we're going to
Yeah.
frame yet another guy." It's like you got to have a whole like police board, conspiracy theory strings
Right.
drawn to understand why anybody's doing anything that they're doing in
Hmm.
in these movies. And then of course the motivation, the only one I would probably outright without question understand is Billy Loomis's mom wanting revenge on Sydney.
Right.
But why kill all those other people who had nothing else to do with it? I mean, Randy didn't, until she, poked him and the subject of Billy Loomis came out, she didn't have any extra reason to kill Randy because he didn't do anything back in the day. And,
Hmm.
why bring Mickey into it? Why not just go find Sydney and just corner her and pop her, bang bang? That all the and I say that only because, and this is when you get into the whole horror genre,
Hmm.
to go down such a long road, she could have been caught at any time. One little thing could have gone wrong and she gets busted
Right.
or she gets caught or anything could have happened. And a competent police officer could have actually, shot her at any point or caught her.
Yeah. Yeah.
So my point is I understand the revenge. I just clearer than any other motivation, but I also don't get that she went to such extreme lengths and such,
Hmm.
you know,
Yeah, I think the whole reason they killed so many people in Scream 2 was to pay, like, they need to cover up that they're the ones doing it. Mikey wanted to be caught, but Mrs. Loomis didn't want to be caught. So she wanted to make sure that her motivation was such that everything else that's happening, she can pin it on other people. And then in 3, I guess Roman just doesn't care if he gets caught or not. He's obviously gonna, blame it on other people, but it's his Scream 3 is where I have the biggest problem because it's just such an outlandish concept. And I get the Jamie Kennedy bringing everything back and talking about how we're going back to the beginning and we're going to learn things about history that we didn't know. But I feel like Scream 3 was oddly cobbled together and it never feels like a true complete ending to this franchise,
um
which
yeah.
which is why I guess they opened the door and are now making more of them. But it just didn't sit right with me. And aside from Gail's hair, I just have a couple problems with Scream 3, and one of being that there's in my mind no way Roman could be the only killer doing all of these things that he did. I don't see how he was able to get away with everything.
Yeah, that I thought the same thing because there's always been two because one can't be in
Mhm.
one place and one can't be in the other. And then they give you the red herring that he was dead in the coffin. So then you're
Right.
like, oh, he's not even the guy. So it must be the cop. And I thought they did a good job of that. Because again, once Jamie Kennedy explained what was happening, I was like, okay, I'll allow it, because I was noticing, obviously, like, wow, we're talking about Sydney's mom a lot, and like, it's like, wait a minute, we never knew anything about her. She was just a device to engineer Scream One. Nobody cared about her mom. Her mom had already died, and that was just what was the triggering event. And now we're learning all this stuff, and now we're getting backstory, and it's sort of, when I talked about sequels, you got too plotty and too complicated. But then when Jamie, in his meta way, brings that point up, that is it an overly complicated backstory, something you never knew about a character from the first one, I was like, okay. And that's why I said I settled into it at that point, because he flat out said, I get it, guys, you're probably confused, going, what? Here's your why you're
Yeah.
doing that, so like, to make fun of the fact that sequels do get too complicated and decide they have to go back to the beginning and explain things that never needed explaining,
Hmm.
just to make
Yeah.
that third movie make any kind of sense, I was like, okay, you got me now. I appreciate your cleverness. I don't like it,
Hmm.
but I appreciate it.
Yeah. And that's the same thing too for me. I appreciate it. I just don't love it. I still like it okay. I'll still watch it, but it's Scream 3 is the one that I go to the least. I'll watch 1 and 2 over and over and over again, 1 especially. And then I'll throw on Scream 4 now every once in a while, but 3 is just like I feel like I know it well enough that I don't need to really sit through it, you know.
What did you think of Liv? What did you think of Liv Schreiber at the beginning of 3?
I thought it was great. I thought it's great to see that he got what he wanted and then he loses it all, you know, by being
I
caught and
agree.
weary.
Again,
Yeah.
as a sub character in 1, didn't even appear in the film except in
Footage, right?
footage,
Hmm.
and then to make him such a central character in 2, again wanting his fame, I was
Hmm.
like, wow, that's really really good. That's interesting that an actor would allow himself to be like, look, I'll just be in this one. Because I don't know if you're aware, I'm sure you are, but the writer of Scream 1 and Scream 2 pitched these as
Yep.
a franchise from the
Yep.
get-go, which is
Kevin
why,
Williamson, who became a name in horror for years. I mean, he's still doing great things, but he became a writer for horror films in the 90s. Like his name is synonymous with great films.
and see, that's, knowing that now, I just learned that doing research for this. Knowing that now, that's why because I remember Scream 2 thinking like, geez, they got Liv Schreiber to like, hey, guess what? We're going to write you a whole role this time if we can use your likeness basically in the first one as the killer. And now it's because the whole thing was pitched as a package. Like,
Hmm.
that's why they were able to get Liv Schreiber to even sign on for that, because it
Yep.
seemed like such a small part, especially since he was just footage, to be like, oh wow, they actually got him to show up. I don't know, I didn't realize that it was all pitched as one thing.
Yeah. I mean, another thing too, though, is that he wasn't huge. You know, he was still getting bit parts, and so Scream, when it was pitched to him as a movie where he'll grow in each movie, he took his chance because he had really done next to nothing. And
Sure.
so Scream 2 actually is what got him other roles. He was in Phantoms, which
But Affleck was the bomb in Phantoms.
Word, bitch. Phantom's like a motherfucker. What's up now?
but he was in Phantoms. He was in Sphere right after that. And he had a really good part in Sphere. I mean, I really like that movie. And then Scream 3. And now he's blown up. But he did a lot of nothing to then get bigger roles and bigger roles to then, how many years after Scream 3? 9, 10 years, he becomes Sabretooth.
Right.
He had a long game to get to where he is now.
For sure. Yeah. And I know he wasn't a big actor when he did Scream 1. I just, not really, again, this is a lot of pre-internet and not getting as much background information on movies and stuff. I
Mhm.
just was like, wow, that's the same guy.
Well, did
Oh.
you know that he was supposed to be one of the killers in the original script for Scream 2?
I did not know that.
So the original script for Scream 2 leaked before the movie came out, and Kevin Williamson had to rewrite the ending.
Ah, okay.
And Cotton Weary was going to be a side killer. They were going to actually have 4 killers in Scream 2. And I'm very glad that the script leaked because I wouldn't have wanted to see 4 killers. I like the 2 that we got.
Well, I wouldn't have wanted to see Cotton Weary as a killer.
Right.
I liked better that he didn't do it. He just was
Mm-hmm.
really just an innocent guy who had an affair with some woman and then got caught up. Which is
Yeah.
why, to bring it back to 3, I liked that. Yes, we do see that he gets everything he wanted. He gets his fame, and then more than I suppose Jamie Kennedy's appearance would probably be the best part for me. But as far as meta goes, I love that right away on the phone he says, "Yeah, I got to do a cameo in the Stab 3. Oh, I just got to
Yep.
show up real quick as a cameo at the beginning," which is what he's doing
Yep.
now. And then, of course, years later, when, like you said, his star has risen. So now it really is not beneath him, but it's definitely revisiting early career material. And then not only does he say that, which is funny because now it's meta for him being in both,
Mm-hmm.
but he gives the line from Scream 1, which is the no-no, and he says to the person when he switches calls over, "Yeah, I'll be right back."
Yep. Yep.
And boom, I was like, oh, so he shows up just to get killed at the beginning of Scream 3? I love it.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah, it was
love
great.
it.
It was great. So quickly moving into Scream 4, what were your thoughts on that? Because that movie, a lot of people are divisive over Scream 3. Scream 4 kind of redeemed the film for Scream purists, Scream fans, but it didn't do well in the theaters. And so what are your thoughts on Scream 4?
It didn't do much for me, honestly. I mean, if The
Mm-hmm.
Force Awakens was just A New Hope again, this was Scream 4 was just Scream 1, like tripling or quadding down on the meta, which I kind of felt like, even though I watched them in reverse order and still hadn't seen 3 before I saw 4, I felt like they'd already done that. Like
Mm-hmm.
by the end of 2, I felt like you've already gone meta enough. And then as I already explained about 3 and Jamie popping in to explain about backstory. So when I started watching 4, I was like, all I'm doing is watching Scream 1. And then the characters even say, he's replicating all the killing from the original Woodsboro murders. There's a party, there's this. If this happens, then this happens. And then I was like, I'm really not buying this. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm not invested really. I mean, I still cheer for Sydney, but I'm like, now she's successful and Dewey and Gail, and I don't know.
Yeah.
I just couldn't get into it, especially because you had the 2 film nerds, and then they have their own set of rules. But now that we live in a modern era, and you can have cameras and you live stream, it wasn't terrible. It really, I didn't hate it. I
Mm-hmm.
just couldn't connect with it.
Yeah, I do think they went with the reboot a little too, they leaned heavily into the reboot, and the rules, I think, just didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. And that's where I kind of had trouble with it,
Mm-hmm.
is the rules. And so it all makes sense, and I think it was done well, and it was shot well, and I mean, this is Wes Craven's last film, so I think that holds a special place in my heart too, even if it's not the best of the quadrology. But I do like that they're going with the new generation of everything's online. They have to stream it. They're sharing it with the world in that way to make it connect with today's audience, because that's what would happen. And it makes me excited to see what's going to happen in Scream 5.
Oh, I'm
Nev
totally
Campbell's already
excited for
signed on to
5.
come back. Yeah,
Yes.
Nev Campbell's signed on, and I think we will. I don't know. It says in the film that they're going back to Woodsboro in the press release that they put out there. So we'll see what actually happens. But I'm very intrigued to find out if if 5 lives up to 1 and 2.
4 seemed long to me.
Mm-hmm.
Like the whole extended going to the hospital scene just seemed like so much. And then when she's like, oh, we can be twins or whatever because we both have shoulder wounds. And Dewey
Mm-hmm.
goes, yeah. And then Gail and like immediately when she said it, I'm like, this
Right.
is Scooby-Doo mystery now.
Right.
Like, oh my gosh, how blatant. Now I have to watch Dewey leave, go to Gail, and Gail has to point out, how would she know unless she's the killer? I'm like,
Right.
oh, you just made me now mentally mad. I'm going to have to watch 3 minutes of
Yeah.
solving this dumb little slip of the tongue.
Yeah. I
And
think what's good about Scream 4, and maybe not the execution like you're talking, but I think what's good about it is that they take how the first movie ended, which is supposed to, it's supposed to be a retread. And one of the rules is it's not over when you think it is.
mm-hmm.
So they're in the house and, everything happens in the house. And we think that Sydney's going to die now. And her niece Jill is going to get away with it. We then go to the hospital. That's where the first movie ended, in the house.
Mm-hmm.
Now we go to the hospital and we have this extra ending, which is part of this
Mm-hmm.
this requel or reboot rule. So I do appreciate that, but I agree that it was a little too on the nose.
Parts of it felt low budget to me, honestly. I felt like I was watching a lot of cramped little shots. I didn't feel like Scream 1 and Scream 2, they felt very big to me. They felt large. Like I was really in a town and I was really on a college campus and like I was really in the world. And then 3 felt a little tight to me because we were in the soundstage and we were in the mansion, and it's a different feel, of course, and it just didn't feel real to, and then 4, yeah, I didn't feel like I was back in Woodsboro, really.
Yeah.
um
It did have a different aesthetic to it.
mhm.
And I don't know if that's just supposed to be time passing and things change, or if it's location shooting is different. So, but I kind of get what you're saying. It's still in the town, and we see the town. We see a bookstore. We see a hospital. We see the barn. We see the house. But it's
Sure,
different. It feels different.
it felt, yeah, but even then, even when they did do outdoors, I felt like I was on a back lot.
Yeah.
I guess
Yeah.
I didn't feel like that in the first
No,
2.
I get that. I get that. What did you think about the opening? The different fake out openings?
Funny.
Yeah,
I
I
like
thought they were comical.
I like that it's, now we're just throwing meta all over the place.
Yeah, yeah.
Like I'd love to hear Rick Sanchez from Rick and Morty's take on this. Jeez, Morty, you got so much meta around here, I'm slipping in it.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, that was a neat beginning, because then it's now a reboot is a real world remake of a movie that was already camping real world horror movies, but this is all real for everybody in every, so it's almost like
Right.
Inception. It's a layer of a layer
Yeah.
of a layer of a layer. And then, so it was a great way to set it all up. And then, and then, and then I just didn't connect really. I think maybe that's part of it. Like I didn't really like Sydney's cousin. The 2 film guys were just, neither one of them popped as their own character as much as they just,
As much as Randy, yeah, they were Randy surrogates, the 2 of them together.
yeah,
Well, one was Randy, one was Stu, but
right. And
they
then
were, yeah.
I like David Arquette though. I thought he was really good. I mean, I always like watching him as Dewey. He's fun.
Right.
And Gail, that was she. Courtney Cox, that was good. So, but again, I don't know. Does that make me like, again, citing Star Wars? Am I just like liking Luke, Han, and Leia, but not caring for Rey, Finn, and Poe? But
Yeah.
but at least Rey, Finn, and Poe, they at least sort of pop for you. I just didn't feel that from this subcast. You know what I mean? Like I still felt like the original characters were the original characters, but the new characters were bland copies. So I didn't care who killed who, ultimately.
Right. Yeah, I hear that. I hear that. I kind of feel the same way. I like Sydney. I like Gail. I like Dewey. I like how Anthony Anderson gets it in the squad car. And his name in the film is he's Officer Perkins. So his name in the movie is Anthony Perkins, which is an homage to Psycho.
Sure.
Which is something that, Billy Loomis uses the line from Psycho. We all go a little mad sometimes in the original Scream.
Mm-hmm.
So I like all the callbacks. I like all the fun horror ties that they build, but it's just, you're right. It's not the same as the first movie. And I don't know that we'll ever capture something like Scream 1.
You can't.
So,
and that's why even Scream 2, because it was sold as a franchise, as a package, I almost see Scream 2 as Scream 1 Part 2.
Mm-hmm.
And
that they are just almost so good together.
They are so good together. And then 3, you got to round out your trilogy, but I don't know, just didn't quite do it. So just to sum up my overall thoughts on the Scream Quadrology here, just a few little points that didn't get mentioned but are kind of standouts for me. Scream 1, I love when Henry Winkler opens the door looking for the noise, and there's the old man dressed up like Freddy Krueger as the janitor, and he just looks up and goes, "Huh?" And Henry Winkler goes, "Oh, not you, Fred." That was hysterical to me. Because again, it's another layer of meta. And you've got Freddy Krueger, played by Wes Craven, the creator of The Nightmare on Elm Street. So it's even more meta that the actor playing the guy who looks like the monster from the other movie is the guy who made him. So I love that. Scream 2, we talked about that scene on the quad where Jamie Kennedy gets killed. And I'll tell you, Phil, this is my number one scariest thing about horror movies for me, is when people are getting murdered in the daylight. Because that means the monster has broken free of the confines of night, and anything can happen at any time. Because traditionally, you feel safe during the day. That's when you take a break from the killing and the murdering, and everything's all right. It's daytime. Nothing happens during the daytime. And Jamie gets it in broad daylight. And it's like, ooh, not only is nobody's safe no time. you don't get your rest. Like of course, vampires, right? You get a break from vampires for 12 hours or so. But and again, speaking of Wes Craven, the part that scared me the most, pretty much of any horror movie I've ever seen, is from Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Freddy's Revenge, when he shows up at that pool party, because now it's not even the dream world. He's in real life. Freddy is standing here. He's right there. He's not in my brain. He's not in Nancy's brain. He's right there at the grill. He's right there by the pool. That scene terrified me. And I mean, it happened at night, but it terrified me that he could be there.
Be in the real world, yeah.
I love the beginning of Scream 2 when they're at the premiere of Stab. Because not only are they handing out Ghostface killer costumes, apparently they're also handing out cocaine. Because I have never seen a more coked up movie audience in my life. Those people are insane. Like, what is
it's crazy.
Are they putting PCP on the popcorn?
It's like they're doing it. It's like there's an extra level because all those people either know Sydney goes to their school, so they're like really excited for Stab. But the way that they're acting, I mean, I would have left that theater. I would have gone to see Sandra Bullock or whatever they're talking about, because there's no way I want to watch a movie when the theater acts like that.
No, I never would have stayed. I would have been gone. I would have been like, what is wrong with you?
I love that Stab shows Heather Graham in the role that Drew Barrymore played. We have to give a shout out to Drew Barrymore's performance.
Yep.
Because I don't know if you knew this, but Heather Graham was originally sought for that role that Drew Barrymore played. So it's another meta piece of the film that Drew Barrymore got the part. She originally wanted Sydney, but then she couldn't take that big of a role because of other things that were going on. So she took that cameo in the beginning of the movie. and then another person that was going for that plays that character in the second movie, showing the first. I mean, it's just so meta. Everything's great.
Sure.
I love it. I love it.
And speaking of that, I like Jada Pinkett.
Mhm.
This is when she says, "Why she got to be naked? Why she got to do that?"
Yep.
And then they call that back in Scream 3 when Jenny McCarthy is talking to Roman, or she thinks it's Roman, and says,
Mhm.
"Why do I got to be naked?
Well-
Why do I got to be coming out of the shower naked?"
Right.
And I love, again, the meta-ness between even the movies themselves, while it's
Yep.
still making fun of the trope of the naked woman in the shower getting killed, and then that's a
Yep.
nod to Psycho and all the other stuff. So
Yeah.
anyway,
It's good. It's great. I think these movies do a great job.
one other thing to bring up about Scream 3 specifically, and I thought this was really cool, and I don't know how to frame it really in my head, because I think it's neat, but I'm also like a little like mystified as to what this means. There's a scene at the studio, and it's a backlot tour, and a whole bunch of tourists are going by, and Jay and Silent Bob are in the line. You remember this
Yeah.
scene?
Yep. I sure do.
But it's not Kevin Smith and
Jason Mewes.
Jason Mewes. It's literally Jay and Silent Bob. I think Jay
Yep.
even says like, "Hey, Silent Bob," and I'm like, well, if that means that if Jay and Silent Bob are Jay and Silent Bob, that means that the Scream movies take place in the Kevin Smith universe.
Yep. The Viewist universe, as they call it.
That's kind of neat to know that.
Yeah.
You know,
Mhm.
it's sort of like they just introduced The Watchmen actually takes place in the DC universe. So now with the Scream movies, I'm like, wait a minute. So Dewey could be reading Blunt Man and Chronic comics, and
Yep.
Brody could be, Brody or the convenience store guys from Clerks could be sitting around going, "Man, did you hear about those Woodsboro murders?" You know?
I'm sure they are. I'm sure Randall, he's the Randy in the
Yes.
sense of talking about the rules and how everybody died, I'm sure. But do you want to know something really odd about it? Is that it's very weird, because in the first Scream movie, in Stu's basement, there was the VHS cassette tape of Clerks.
Really?
So that's kind of weird. Yeah. And in Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back, Kevin Smith had Wes Craven make an appearance as the director of a fictitious version of Scream 4.
Really?
But then 10 years later, he would come back and actually make Scream 4.
Wow.
It's like a weird universe going on here.
That's all kinds of crazy levels of. It's also
Meta-ness.
Yeah. Well, I think that's neat when universes kind of cross over. And here's one, has nothing to do with Scream, but in 1999 Phantom Menace, there's a contingency of ETs in the big Senate scene. And then in ET, they go trick-or-treating, and somebody goes walking by dressed as Yoda, and ET is like, "Ooh, ooh, ooh," and goes a little. Is it because he's like, "Hey, I know him from HoloVids. That's that
Probably.
Jedi." And he's like, "He can get me home," but then the kids are like, "No, no, 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 no. Get away," I don't know. It's funny how that crosses over like that. But yeah, I thought that was pretty cool. I did not realize I was going to get a Jay and Silent Bob kind of meta experience there.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so weird. I love, though, that Kevin Smith and Jason Mewes were in Scream 3, and then they made Wes Craven do a cameo filming Scream 4 when they were doing all of those horrible movie scenes when they were running through the studio. So it's just funny because they, at that time, tongue in cheek, they were like, "This is never going to happen."
Mm-hmm.
And they made Scream 4 one of those movies. Good Will Hunting 2, Hunting Season was in that.
Yes. Oh,
And
that's right.
so
Yeah.
they kept running through different movies that were tongue in cheek bad. And it's funny that they actually made Scream 4.
Wow.
I'm just still waiting for Good Will Hunting 2 Hunting Season.
Yeah.
As another callback to their cameo in Scream 3, Kevin Smith included a copy of Scream 3 in a scene during Jersey Girl.
Wow. See,
Yeah, it's all different layers of meta.
it is, because then that means that Scream is a movie in the Kevin Smith universe, but it actually happened in the Kevin Smith universe. So, wow, that's just mind blowing.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
One final thing on the Scream movies. It's not really a fun thing. It's just something I noticed, and I think it just kind of stands out even more so today. A very, very, very white cast in all the Scream movies. Like almost glaringly noticeable now that there are no black people. I mean, very few, very few. And
Right.
and you could,
And it's really any person of color.
well, exactly, yeah. And you could have easily made anybody any race you wanted to make them. There was no real reason to go that way, and I'm not saying that there was anything nefarious behind it. I'm just saying, just something I noticed. And I really especially noticed it with Scream 4, because
Yeah,
it was,
for sure.
oh my gosh. And Scream 4, it really, really sang at me. And I watched these in reverse order. And Scream 4 obviously is the newer, more modern Scream movie. And you would have thought that when that was made, there would have been a little bit more diversity included.
No, I mean, still though, that was 9 years ago, and so even it being 9 years ago, it's still glaringly whitewashed. Anthony Anderson is the only cast member, and they even make a joke about him being black.
Right. Which seems really weird in the
Yep.
fact that, they're sort of camping the horror genre, and yet there's no reason that you couldn't have included more diversity in it.
Right.
Um,
Yep. I mean, Scream 2 had Jada Pinkett Smith on the cover of the poster, and she dies in the first 10 minutes, which is kind of a callback, her and Omar Epstein, the first 10 minutes, and it's a callback to the original Scream poster that had Drew Barrymore on the main poster as the only cast member on the poster, and she died in the first couple minutes. So they got the big star of Jada Pinkett Smith and killed her off, and then Sydney's roommate is the only other person of color in the rest of the cast.
right.
And then Scream 3, who was it in Scream 3?
The guy who plays the guy in the Stab movies.
That's right. And he was on the poster also.
Yes.
So they put him front and center, but he had maybe 10 lines in the whole movie.
Yeah, very, very little to do with that. And again, I know like diversity is a big issue now, and I'm behind it. And sometimes I think diversity just to be diverse can be distracting. But I think in Scream's case, through today's lens, it's almost distracting to not have any diversity. Like, where is Woodsboro that there are no people of color, there?
Mm-hmm.
And even, I mean, Sydney was at a college, I mean, a full-blown university. Like, sure, if you want to say that Woodsboro High is in some real small farming community somewhere, okay, whatever, fine. But I mean, geez, she was at a full-blown university, and there were still nobody in the film classes, nobody in the sororities or the fraternities. I mean, except for Sydney's friend. But it really struck me too in Scream 3 when Hayden Panettiere and her two friends drive up.
Or Scream 4.
Or I'm sorry, Scream 4. Yeah, when they roll up in their SUV or whatever it was to go to school, and I'm like, geez, am I watching Mean Girls 2? This is this is, I got to put sunglasses on. This is very bright. There's a glare coming off of my TV when I watch Scream. But anyway, just something I noticed.
It's we'll see what happens in Scream 5, because that's going to come out in 2022, and hopefully we'll have more casting announcements in the coming months, and we'll see some diversity come to Woodsboro. I digress. Did anything that happened throughout the Scream movies? I know it's funny that you've watched 3 and 4 recently, but Did they ruin your childhood?
No, they did. It really didn't. And it was, like I said, I watched them all in reverse order, thinking that I had seen 3 and just couldn't remember it. But no, I'd only seen bits and pieces. But Scream 4 didn't do anything for the originals for me, because then 3, 2, 1 just they are solid. They're solid films. They do something that we hadn't seen before. And then, even though technically we're seeing it a couple times, just extensions of itself, which in itself is meta. Anyway, no, it did not ruin my childhood.
Yeah, me neither. I really, really love Scream 1 and Scream 2. Scream 3 is kind of a take it or leave it for me. I still enjoy it, but I'm not going to throw it on all the time. And Scream 4, I've only watched 3 or 4 times at this point, and it's been out for 10 years. Or almost 10 years, but in rewatching it for this podcast, I do find that there are things that I really enjoy about it, and there's also some things that just fall flat. And I think you kind of put into words what I was thinking about, how it feels small and feels lower budget, because it doesn't have the scope of 1 and 2. And I think you finally put it into words for what I was feeling about it. But I do like the Hayden Panettiere character, Kirby. I do like that Sydney's back. I love Alison Brie from Community, and I just love that she has this bit role in the film at playing a new version of Gale Weathers. Like, I appreciate what they tried to do in rebooting the franchise, so to speak. And in the reboot, there are characters that call back to old characters from the original movie. And I do think that that's a fun way to do it. So they didn't ruin my childhood, but I like them all the more knowing that there's more coming. And like any horror movie, even the bad ones, I'll watch them just for fun. So I can't wait to see what Scream 5 brings, and hopefully Scream 6, and hopefully Scream 7, and we just keep going. So
I agree.
That's my feeling, and I'm sticking to it. So, Eric, where can people find you?
People can find me on the 3rd bar stool down at the local pub. I will be there from 5 to 7, and then again from 10 to 1 a.m. You can also find me on Instagram at Eric_Walensky.
Very nice. I'll see you at the bar. You can find me on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at Phildimo, Fildimo. Also follow this podcast, Ruin My Childhood, at podcastruined. And we hope that this look back at the Scream Quadrology didn't ruin your childhood.
Could it be I've misunderstood? This podcast ruined my childhood.
Jesus Christ, you don't know the rules?
Have an aneurysm, why don't you?
There are certain rules that one must abide by in order to successfully survive a horror movie. For instance, number 1, you can never have sex. Big no-no! Big no!
I'm a dead man.
Sex equals death, okay? Number 2, you can never drink or do drugs. No, the sin factor. It's a sin. It's an extension of number 1. And number 3, never, ever, ever, under any circumstances, say, I'll be right back. Because you won't be back.
I'm getting another beer. You want one?
Yeah, sure.
I'll be right back.
You see, you push the laws and you end up dead. Okay, I'll see you in the kitchen with a knife.
Okay, let's get down to business. The way I see it, someone's out to make a sequel. You know, cash in on all the movie murder hoopla. So it's our job to observe the rules of the sequel. Number 1, the body count is always bigger. Number 2, the death scenes are always much more elaborate. More blood, more gore. Carnage, candy. Your core audience just expects it. And number 3, if you want your sequel to become a franchise, never, ever...
How do we find the killer, Randy? That's what I want to know.
If this killer does come back, and he's for real, there are a few things that you gotta remember. Is this simply another sequel? Well, if it is, same rules apply. But here's the critical thing. If you find yourself dealing with an unexpected backstory and a preponderance of exposition, then the sequel rules do not apply. Because you are not dealing with a sequel. You are dealing with the concluding chapter of a trilogy. That's right. It's a rarity in the horror field, but it does exist. And it is a force to be reckoned with. Because true trilogies are all about going back to the beginning and discovering something that wasn't true from the get-go. Godfather, Jedi, all revealed something that we thought was true that wasn't true. So if it is a trilogy you are dealing with, here are some super trilogy rules. 1, you got a killer who's going to be superhuman. Stabbing him won't work. Shooting him won't work. Basically, in the third one, you got to cryogenically freeze his head, decapitate him, or blow him up. Number 2, anyone, including the main character, can die. This means you, Sid. I'm sorry. It's the final chapter. It could be fucking Reservoir Dogs by the time this thing is through. Number 3, the past will come back to bite you in the ass. Whatever you think you know about the past, forget it. The past is not at rest. Any sins you think were committed in the past are about to break out and destroy you. So in closing, let me say, good luck, Godspeed, and for some of you, I'll see you soon.
Like, they are freaking nuts. I was laughing so hard watching that because I remember, like, oh yeah, it's the big premiere. But then I'm like, they're jumping in the lobby going, ha 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 ha. I'm like, this is like reefer madness.